Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to yet another comic book video. Finishing up a week of comic book themed videos. This is Friday, and we are calling this Fantastic Friday, where we look at an issue of the Fantastic Four. Specifically, this issue, number 149, To Love, Honor, and Destroy, with a very busy cover by Rich Buckler that takes a scene from the story. But we have a little backstory to go through first. And part of that backstory is born of the Stan Lee virus that I've mentioned in a few of these comic book videos, where Stan Lee introduced real-world verisimilitude into comic book superhero stories. And that includes the fact that teammates bicker with each other. It includes the fact that some superheroes don't like other superheroes. And it even includes marital distress in the foremost marriage in Marvel Comics between Sue Richards and Reed Richards, the two, the married couple at the heart of the Fantastic Four, which is it's a relationship that's had its ups and downs. Reed is considerably older than Sue and has been, for a lot of the Fantastic Four's history up to this point, overprotective of her, even though she has superpowers of her own. But it didn't stop the Stan Lee virus from progressing. And although since we have these two and they are in love with each other, well, it stands to reason that at some point they get married. And there was an extravagant issue of the wedding of Reed and Sue. And if they're married, well, then it stands to reason that sooner or later a baby would come along. And a baby does come along. This sort of stuff was unthinkable for Hawkman and Hawkgirl or whatever. But it happened. And so Reed and Sue have a baby, little Franklin Richards. And it was naturally assumed on the part of all and sundry that Franklin Richards would have superpowers. This is the Stan Lee world, after all. What those superpowers are remains unclear. But if we look at the genetics involved, well, first of all, Franklin Richards would not inherit any superpowers from his mother or his father because you can't inherit acquired traits. Reed and Sue are not born with superpowers. They are not mutants themselves. They are mutated by cosmic radiation. And in Fantastic Four #1, when they are both bombarded with radiation, whether or not they develop superpowers and whether or not they develop different superpowers, one thing is absolutely certain, unless you're talking just about Fantasyland, unless you're talking about magic. The one thing that's absolutely certain from Fantastic Four #1 is that Sue Richards would be sterile. But nevertheless, they have a baby, and Franklin Richards starts to exhibit weird superpowers that, since he's a baby, seem to be uncontrollable. And in an earlier issue here, the little baby Franklin Richards starts to show the little boy. He's a little boy. He's about 4 years old, thereabouts. He starts to show those superpowers, and in an excess of caution, in a bit of parenting that would go down very well with the alt-right in America today, Reed Richards fires a ray gun at him to turn him into a vegetable, to shut down all his brain's higher functions. He does it while he's in his mother's arms. Sue Richards is horrified. The rest of the Fantastic Four are horrified. It doesn't do any good for Reed Richards to say, well, he might have gone off like a bomb. Or at least this way, I can fix him. I can work on the problem, but I couldn't if it was running out of control. It's no good for him to say that. It's just not, as 2023 would say, a good look for you to lobotomize your son. And Sue Richards storms off and eventually presents Reed Richards with divorce papers, because this was the 70s. So she presents him with divorce papers. We, as comic book fans, get the sight of the leader of the Fantastic Four slumped in his chair, holding divorce papers in his hand. And the Thing and Johnny Storm, Sue's brother, take one of the little aircrafts from the Baxter Building, the headquarters of the Fantastic Four, to go to where Sue is staying with two of her friends in Pennsylvania to talk some sense into her. This is all in an earlier issue. And in that earlier issue, as the Thing is flying solo, the Human Torch is flown on ahead, as the Thing is flying solo over a lake, a random lake in Pennsylvania, the Submariner, Prince Namor the Submariner, erupts out of the water, smashes the aircraft, punches the Thing, and says, "Don't interfere. I don't want to hurt you, but don't interfere." uh, the Thing is a street kid from Yancey Street. You might, if you tell him don't interfere, he might listen to you. If you preface that by punching him first, then he's not going to. He's going to fight you instead, and they do. They fight, but it's inconclusive. The Submariner flies off and says, Sue Richards is with me now, so don't interfere. They make their way to Sue's old friend's house, and they say, yeah, Namor abducted her. So, and they go back to the Baxter building to tell this to Reed Richards, who seems out of his mind. He's caustic and vicious with his teammates. He refers to Ben Grimm, his oldest friend, as Grimm. And he decides to do something about it. It turns out that fancy set of suit, that suit that the Submariner is wearing, fancy thing with the underarm wings and the vest and whatnot, that is something that Prince Namor has to wear. He is in a recent storyline in the Submariner's own comic book, he had been poisoned, and Reed Richards comes up with a way to save his life, but is to wear this life-preserving suit. And it turns out in these issues that Reed Richards has the ability to track a particular kind of radiation that is in that suit, so he can figure out where the Submariner is. And they want to head off. He wants to head off and find the Submariner and get his wife back. And he is accompanied here by the Thing and by the Human Torch. But before they can set off, the Frightful Four attacks the Baxter building again. And there's a pitched battle, and in the middle of that battle, Thundra shows up. 7-foot-tall Amazon chain-wielding superpowered woman who has it in her mind to beat up on Ben Grimm as the Thing. She seems obsessed with some sort of S&M and not the good kind of relationship with the Thing. She wants to pound him to pudding to prove that she's the better man or the better woman or whatever. And she shows up while the team is fighting with the Frightful Four and helps them to defeat the Frightful Four. So she's involved when this was all a distraction. And when Reed Richards gets back to the obsession of finding his wife in the company of Prince Namor, Thundra goes along for the ride. That is how we start this issue, is with the let me get a close up here. The four of them flying off to face the Submariner. There's Reed Richards. There's Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, in his red costume. There was a brief period when Jerry Conway is the writer here, and Rich Buckler is the artist, but you're going to notice Rich Buckler doesn't really have a style of his own. He is very much an imitator of other styles. Once upon a time, that was a very popular thing to do. Ron Frenz did it decades later to really good effect. But for a brief while, Johnny Storm was portrayed as a muscular hunk, someone who's in his mid-20s and has a red costume. And Thundra just comes along. She doesn't appear to... she appears to be interested enough to go along for the ride here. Reed tells them, as a matter of fact, I feel almost no emotion at all, except perhaps hatred. A hatred you couldn't understand, and for your sake, I pray you never do. And the reason they're taking off from the Baxter building is because the Submariner is attacking New York City. He is astride a giant sea monster, and he's leading a bunch of other sea monsters in an attack on New York City with Sue Richards at his side. He is not leading an army of Atlanteans, his subjects, because at this point in Marvel continuity, they appear all to be dead. He appears to be a king without a kingdom. But he still has control over gigantic sea monsters, and he's leading them to fight the police on the docks of Manhattan, while having Sue Richards with him. He says that this is a declaration of war with the accursed Fantastic Four. And Sue Richards says, but Namor, what about Johnny and Ben? You promised they wouldn't be hurt, that you wouldn't. And he says, they who stand with my enemy are my enemy, Susan, my enemy and yours. This is Jerry Conway doing the writing. And as you can see, Rich Buckler is imitating Jack Kirby. Sometimes right down to the panel arrangements. He's just sometimes right down to tracing the panel arrangements. We're going to see that really clearly. You won't know unless you're a Fantastic Four fan. You won't know, but it is definitely happening. Fans who had been reading the Fantastic Four from the beginning, as I was when I shelled out my 25 cents for this issue, were looking at Rich Buckler's artwork and saying, wait a minute, I've seen this panel layout before. I paid for this when I paid 12 cents for this 10 years ago. But the Fantastic Four attack. and Reed Richards, Prince Namor deals with Reed Richards in no time at all. Reed Richards might be an angry, a vengeful husband, but the Submariner is one of the most powerful characters in the Marvel Universe. He tells them, insult me if you must, Ben Grimm. Mockery won't change the truth of my accusations. Soon you and your friends will beg for mercy at my hand, a mercy that will be denied you, as you denied mercy to Sue. Because he's throwing back in Reed Richards' face what Reed Richards did. Sue Richards has told him, he lobotomized my kid. So that's what Namor actually says to Reed Richards when they're grappling with each other. He says, you egotistical fool, you've lost Sue already. You destroyed whatever love there was between you when you put your own son into a coma. That is actually true. Here we see a coloring mistake. Prince Namor is standing on the head of this gigantic sea creature, and the colorer thought that the flaps directly behind his ears were part of his costume, so they colored it blue. But it's not. That's actually the head of this purple monster. Johnny Storm flies off to attack Prince Namor, but decides instead, before he does, to set up a steam bath around the sea creatures, which gives Prince Namor time to bomb him. Because it's not a very good idea to do that. He flies into the water, and Prince Namor follows him and bashes him up into the air. Thundra has to catch him with her chain, because Reed Richards is still too stunned to catch him himself. And Thundra says, let's simply be thankful that the boy is alive, a fact which I admit surprising, considering Namor's reputed strength. And Ben Grimm attacks the Submariner, and they're liberally fighting, while the fantasy car is flying above them. Sue decides to put an end to this by putting up a force field blockade in front of the craft. It runs into it at full steam and shatters to pieces, and the team falls. Reed Richards says, we're falling, and the thing says, that's what I like about you, Stretcho, you're perceptive. When you see, this is a rather serious fall. This is not. This is. Buckler is mainly just repeating earlier panels, so you get what you give. But the thing that I found funny about this maneuver on Sue's part is that she swears, if you've hurt Prince Namor, I swear I'll make you pay, all of you. And Reed Richards, when the fantasy car is crashing into her force field, Reed Richards says, Sue's force field, it appeared so suddenly there was no time to swerve away. She's demolished the entire fantasy car. It's invisible. So it didn't appear at all. It didn't appear at all. You smashed into it because it's invisible. But anyway, they fall into the water, and Namor says, you did it, Susan. We've won. Don't you see? We've succeeded where so many others have failed. We've defeated the Fantastic Four. And then Conway and Rich Buckler stop in the action. Our heroes are flailing around in the bay. They stop in the action in order to recount the Fantastic Four's entire history with Prince Namor. Starting with when he wooed a much younger Susan Storm, and when Ben Grimm destroys a monster that the Submariner was commanding to attack, the twin of this monster, which the Manhattan police are still trying to fight off. We get in this comic, we get the letters page. It's a 2-page letters page. Fantastic Four once had letters pages, in which one person writes in about Medusa. Medusa is a member of this team. We haven't seen her in this issue because she refuses to go along with the team. She says Namor has never been a vicious man. Why would he do this? And Reed Richards doesn't care. He says, this isn't your affair, Medusa. Stay out. And Johnny Storm says, don't mind my brother-in-law, Red. He calls Medusa Red. He calls her lady. He calls her woman. He never calls her by her name. You'd be snapping too if your lover told you he loved another woman. Even if Sue is my sister, I don't like what she's doing to Reed. We have to stick with him now. He needs us. And Medusa says, Johnny, wait, you go ahead. I have to think about all this. Something about the way Namor's acting bothers me. And Johnny Storm says, look, Medusa, it's up to you. After all, you're not a regular member of the FF. You're an Inhuman. And she walks off. She says, maybe we'll see each other earlier than you think. And a person writing a letter for this issue, the letter is printed in this issue, has a bone to pick about Medusa that is quite well conceived. Did you know that a single strand of a woman's hair can support about 1/4 pound? And that her whole shock of hair should be able to support 12.5 tons? So why is it that you are always showing Medusa lifting only featherweight stuff compared to her potential? An ordinary woman's scalp probably couldn't take that sort of pressure, but Medusa is an inhuman. How about it? Yeah, how about it, Jerry Conway? This is a character who is incredibly strong, incredibly powerful, and that's just lifting things. That's not making a bullwhip out of your hair at 12 tons of pressure. That would take the head off almost anyone the Fantastic Four fights. Certainly, it would stun the Thing. But to get back to the story, Namor is convinced that the Fantastic Four is defeated, and he is leading his creatures to attack Manhattan. And the Thing is saying, I've never heard him talk like this before. He's gone completely wacko. But he's still fighting this great monster when Thundra hauls herself out of the water to attack Namor himself. She says, yeah, you're not to be harmed until we have time for our own battle, a struggle to the death. And Reed Richards says, Thundra, wait, whatever your reason for wanting to fight Namor, he's too powerful for you. You'll be killed. And she says, nonsense. He's only a man, Richards. And Thundra fears no male, this or any other. And they clash. And you see, that's Jack Kirby. We have seen these panels, these things before. Different coloring, different costumes, different everything, but still, this has been traced from earlier Jack Kirby panel designs. And that was not, it's going to be hard to explain in the 2023, but that was not something that was supposed to be unknown to the viewer, to the reader. The reader was supposed to know that this was a kind of panel-by-panel homage, that Buckler was reusing Kirby's style, these big bulbous bodies, and some of Kirby's panel work. And later artists do the same thing. Rich Buckler does the same thing, only imitating other artists. He will imitate Neil Adams in some issues. I don't think it's done anymore. I think Ron Frenz was the last person to do it. He did it really well, but I don't think anybody else would do it now. But Namor says, then woman, whoever you are a fool. And because you are a fool, you must pay the ultimate penalty for your stupidity. You must face defeat at the hands of Namor, Prince of Atlantis. Namor, the avenging sun. Splack is the sound effect. But Thundra isn't done. He knocks her down, but she's not done at all. Now, Namor, now it's the time for the final blow. I'll make it swift, though you don't deserve it. All men are cruel, vicious, but you who come between two lovers, you are the cruelest man of all. We see a little detail of Namor's costume there that is, I believe, inaccurate to John Romita Sr.'s original design, because why would the back of your shin be open? I think the original design was to free the wings on Namor's ankles, which typically poking out of the cloth themselves here. But while that's going on, while Thundra is keeping Prince Namor busy, and keep in mind she can, according to the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, the greatest book ever written, she's about at Namor's strength range, especially when he's on land. About 80 tons, thereabouts. So, and she's a practiced warrior, so she can keep him busy. The Human Torch is still soaking wet. Reed Richards doesn't have the power to affect things one way or another, and the Thing is busy. You'd think the Thing would be fighting the Submariner, but he frees himself from all these undersea monsters because he wants to talk with Sue Richards. That's the problem here. Not Namor acting weird, but Sue Richards. We get a full-page ad for Giant Size Spider-Man #1. This was a terrific issue. Just the main story was an original story where Spider-Man meets Dracula on a cruise ship, and it was great. Just fantastic. But anyway, Ben Grimm goes to Sue Richards to talk with her while this battle is raging. He says, don't you think you put him through enough already without asking him to give in to the guy who's robbed him of everything that makes his life worth living? And Sue says, you can't mean that, Ben. You can't. Reed doesn't love me. And the Thing says, he's sure doing a pretty good imitation, sister. And Sue says, but he's always so distant. He never seemed to care whatever I was alive or dead. Yet the way he's fighting Namor, the look I saw on his face. Ben, is it possible I've been wrong about him? Everybody makes mistakes, Susie. The trick is admitting them. Stretcho admitted it is. Can you admit yours? She's crying. As Thunder is beating the crap out of Prince Namor. They are still fighting. But Reed has decided, I can't let you fight my battle anymore. I will fight Prince Namor so that he can beat me to a pasty. But it doesn't matter because Sue Richards is going to stop the whole fight. She says, if only I knew what was right. Is it enough that he loves me? Can I forgive him? All that's happened in the past? What about the future? A future without Reed? Without my husband? No! I love him. I've always loved him, and I can't let it end now. Reed, Namor, stop. I've been terribly wrong. I thought love was supposed to be something perfect, something ideal, something unreal and romantic. Namor offered me that once, and that's why I went back to with him when he offered it to me again. But I realize now that there's more to love than a fantasy, that there are countless mistakes, countless injuries, and that none of it matters, none of it, if you just know how to say you're sorry. When I was reading this the first time, back when this came out, I was thinking, yeah, okay, that sounds great on a greeting card, but he put your son in a coma. he lobotomized little Franklin. That's not, oh, I forgot to get the groceries. If you were mad enough to leave him about that, that is still true. That hasn't changed at all. Nevertheless, it's a Hallmark moment. And because they're hugging, the Thing says to Namor, why don't you beat it? You're not wanted here anymore. And oddly, Namor, who seemed to be invading the surface world a minute ago, is perfectly happy about that. He says, I'm no longer needed here. May the blessings of Neptune be on you all. He's smiling. He's happy. What's going on here? He flies over to the man who has been piloting his giant sea turtle, and he says, did all go according to plan, Namor? And Namor says, Project Revival was a complete success, old friend. None of them suspected that it was all an act on my part, that I never intended to destroy New York or truly invade the surface world, nor did they suspect that you, Triton, envoy of the Inhumans. We've done our work well. It's Triton underneath that mask. And if Triton's involved, that means Medusa is involved. Another Inhuman. She's on the radio. They don't have cell phones back then. Didn't have cell phones. She's on the radio. With Triton. And they trade notes about what went on. Black Bolt will be pleased that we've brought our friends together. Black Bolt is the king of the Inhumans. Even if we were forced to use a little deception. Don't you agree, Medusa? She orchestrated the whole thing. She's on the radio with Triton. She orchestrated Namor to bring them together. She says, completely Triton. Namor may be persona non gratis with the FF for a while until we tell them the truth, but in the ends justify the means this time, I think. And I'm sure Sue and Reed Richards would most definitely agree as they kiss. And as Jerry Conway reveals once again that sometimes he was, as the political commentators put it, over his skis when it came to his fancy narration. You want to use a quip or a quote or a term or something, leave it to Stan Lee. Okay? He grew up saturated by this stuff and could get it right. Jerry Conway tries to do that and gets it wrong. The phrase is persona non grata, not persona non gratis. It's not that you're giving away stuff for free. It's persona non grata. And this is from the author who, just a few issues before this, had a character say that he was going to finish things off in one swell swoop instead of one fell swoop. He just completely gets it wrong, as Jerry Conway can be relied upon to do when he's writing highfalutin stuff like this. But nevertheless, we get a nice, heartwarming ending. It's obviously a to be continued, because Franklin Richards is still in a coma. He is still a vegetable. Reed Richards has still done that to his son. But it was neat when you were reading this back in the 70s. It was kind of neat that Namor appears, Sue Richards seems to be going with him, and there is a plot that involves him, and you have to wait. Because the Frightful Four come in between. There's a pause where the Fantastic Four goes back to the Baxter Building and fights supervillains before we resume this storyline. That was kind of neat. And, although it's perhaps possible that there was an intemperate letter sent to the offices of Marvel Comics saying, look, I paid for this artwork once before. Can Rich Buckler draw this thing on his own instead of tracing Jack Kirby's artwork? It's possible that letter writer from ye olden days, 50 years ago, has seen the error of his ways if he's still alive and thinks that maybe this kind of homage artwork has its place in artwork history and comics. But that the divorce is over with, the papers are ripped up, and those of you who know your Fantastic Four continuity, and of course you're not expected to know this at all, from way back when, Fantastic Four 150 fixes the problem of little Franklin. so we don't have to worry about that. And Fantastic Four 150 was an event on its own. A wedding. Another wedding. More verisimilitude creeping its way in. Oh, this was a wedding that was never meant to last. But anyway, that is your comic book video for today, for Fantastic Friday. Fantastic Four number 149, To Love, Honor, and Destroy. Will we continue daily comic book rituals next week? Thursday? Fantastic Friday? Very tempting. We'll have to see. I will wrap this up for now. I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.